Well, Cole, here we are. This is year number 5. Can you believe it? We've been talking about Harry Potter page to screen for half a decade. Does it even feel real?
No, and it doesn't because when I started to read Order of the Phoenix, I actually picked up Goblet of Fire thinking it was year 4 for us. And I read maybe 2 or 3 pages and I was like, I read this very recently. And then I literally had to go to kickseat.com and search Harry Potter because I wasn't sure where we were at in
You
our
could
in
have
our
just
read through.
emailed me, man.
I know, right? But I had my phone. I was just like, all right, I'll search, and I have myriad copies of every book. So that wasn't an issue. It was just remembering where we were. And then I sort of had that dying inside moment of realizing I'm about to read the longest Harry Potter book for like the 8th time. Um, so yeah, it was a lot. And it's crazy that we've been here 5 years and that we only have 2 left. That's what's nuts.
Well, we got to figure out how we're going to do this because we've got 2 books and 3 movies left.
Right. And there is a very clear cutoff point in part 1 and part 2. So it could easily be 2 episodes. Or it could be 1, because part 1 is incredibly boring.
I wonder if we record those back to back and I just release them a year.
There we go. Have it in the bank. Check, please.
Wow. Have it in the Gringotts, as it were. See, I'm starting to get the references finally.
There
They're
you
kicking in. But okay, so Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. It's the longest Harry Potter book, as you mentioned. I think it's my favorite so far. I mean, Rowling, I keep saying she gets better and better. I mean, these are 20-plus-year-old books now. But the stories keep progressing. I mean, it's amazing to think where we were, from Sorcerer's Stone all the way up to here. I think when we first agreed on what we were going to talk about, or like when we were going to talk about this, because I have to map out my reading schedule for the month because I don't read lightning fast like you do. I think
lightning
I texted
bolt scar fast, you mean?
I'll allow it.
Sustained.
Yes. I think I'd mentioned that it was hard to get started because the other Harry Potter books have shorter chapters. And this is the first one that I was cognizant of the fact that chapter 1 is like 20 or 19 or 20,
right,
maybe even more pages long. I'm used to like 3 pages, 4 pages, and we move on. And it just like, it's very lightning fast. It took me a while to get into this one. And I kept thinking, is this how the entire book's going to be? Because it's, 800 pages roughly. But after I got a couple of chapters in, I was just like off. I couldn't put it down, although I had to, because again, I was on a schedule.
I had a pretty similar experience actually, because I knew I had to read this book, and I knew that I didn't really want to, because I've read it numerous times, and I was like, but I like to keep it fresh, and I think it's important for the series, for me to actually be engaged with the material. So I looked at my schedule, which is obviously full of other books for other obligations, right? And I was like, all right, now is the time. And I think it was, late June. I was like, I'll start it. I'll make sure I finish it by the end of the month. And my process was, I believe I went and saw how many chapters there were. I can't remember how many it was, somewhere around 50. And I was like, I'm going to read at least 3 chapters a day, and that'll get me done by X date, because that's when I wanted to finish the book. So I did this for the first 2 days, and then within a week, I had finished the book. Because number one, I was surprised at the quality. I actually remembered Order of the Phoenix as one of the lesser tomes within the Harry Potter canon.
Really?
I liked it for reasons that I'm excited to dive into it, because it felt more relevant now than it did when I first read it, which was obviously when I was quite younger.
Mm-hmm.
And I finished it. And this is what's funny, is it kind of flipped, because I remember the movie being one of my favorites when I first saw it. And I watched it, albeit I was in the middle of a COVID fever dream. I was feeling okay when I watched the movie, but I did not like it as much as I remember. So I effectively just did the old switcheroo. I thought I loved the movie, came out not loving it so much, thought I hated the book, came out enjoying it pretty thoroughly, actually. So it was a pleasant surprise, because a lot of the times I go into these rereads and they are exactly what I remember. But but this one is the first one that I would say really subverted my kind of level set expectations.
And it's, you're right, because this was written in, was it 2004 roughly?
Somewhere around there, maybe
Yeah.
uh, it might be slightly earlier. I
Hmm.
vaguely remember. No, I would have been in sixth grade, so you're
Well,
right.
I could look this up, I guess, in the giant book that I've got, but yeah, that's. I also have the Blu-ray set. I went out and I finally broke down and bought the box set.
I have it
Um,
too.
I think that's a mistake because, and we'll talk about the movie, but I it's no secret when I saw most of the Harry Potter films in the theater when they first came out, and I did not like them. And I hadn't read the book, reading the book for this series, 20 plus years later. Uh, and I'm enjoying the hell out of the books. The further we get along in the movies, the less I'm enjoying them because I'm finding that you cannot squeeze 800 pages worth of story into a 2 hour and 18-minute movie. At least not with the folks who are at the helm here.
Right.
David Yates, more like David Yikes. Um, but yeah, the story is, I think, as you mentioned, I don't know if it's just as relevant today as it was then because we're dealing with a lot of kind of political themes and ideas of like can't trust the media and all that. I mean, that was
Right.
definitely the case back in the early 2000s, the George W. Bush era, and now we're post Trump and all of this other business. But we can talk about all the ways that Rowling was either reflecting or predicting the society that she was writing
Right.
about in her kids' fantasy novels. But essentially, at the end of the last book, Voldemort returned, killed one of Harry Potter's friends, and nobody in the Ministry of Magic believes that the Dark Lord is back, or at least they don't want to acknowledge that they believe it. Harry Potter goes back to Privet Drive for the summer and is really bummed out because he hasn't heard anything from anybody as far as what's going on with this coming war with Voldemort. And he's getting concerned and also feeling like kind of left out. There's a feeling of isolation. And that's one of the beautiful themes throughout the book because it parallels his godfather Sirius Black's journey. I'm talking about the novel here because he's stuck at his kind of family home, which has become the headquarters for the Order of the Phoenix, this sort of secret society, of Dumbledore loyalists who believe that Voldemort has returned because they know, and they're gearing up for what that means. But Sirius, because he's a wanted criminal, because he broke out of Azkaban after being, wrongly convicted of this crime, he can't go anywhere, like at all, because there's people out looking for him and all sorts of spells governing the rules of this world. Um, Qualities that I think were completely dropped in the movie. I putting this film on, I was like, okay, they've skipped 25 pages here. They've skipped 100 pages here.
Yep.
Like it's almost like Zack Snyder's Watchmen. It's a really wonderfully faithful visual representation of what's on some of the pages, but as far as the connective tissue and the themes and what makes the story special, it's none of it is there.
Yep. Completely agree. It feels truncated. It feels stunted in a way. I remember, I watched the movie maybe 2 days after finishing the book, and I was like, wow, they are jumping fast through all of this. Like it is just boom, boom, boom. And the book lets its ideas stew. And I think it's more effective for it because for the impact on Harry of society at large not believing what he knows to be true to really sink in, you may not need 800 full pages, but you need a few hundred. Like it has to grate on him to the point where he will not sit and do nothing, whether or not, this final vision from Voldemort is true, right? He's like, I am tired of being disbelieved, and I am tired of everybody else thinking I'm being some contrarian or some, one of Dumbledore's pawns. I have to act. And it works as a character moment because he has spent an entire year under the thumb of basically an oppressive society that is kind of like putting forth Dolores Umbridge as its avatar, which is another reason I adore this book, because Dolores Umbridge is probably my favorite villain in the entire series. I think she's remarkable, and I think that she is another representation of how relevant it can be with some of the issues you said. There's disbelief in the media, distrust in the media, dishonesty is kind of rampant. And in this book, basically everybody has taken sides in what is effectively a culture war. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, a lot of this feels like what it's like to be alive and exist right now, right? It's like everybody kind of plants their stake and is like, this is where I'm at. I don't really care what else you bring at me. And to see a representation of how that impacts a young mind who should be doing good for the world is pretty remarkable considering how long ago it was written. So I was very intrigued by all of these concepts. And I think that the book really brings them forth in kind of like an elegant build. It's not shoving it down our throats, which is very much what the movie does. And like, if you're going to take a shortcut, make sure it's effective. Make sure it's not just to, go off-roading for a second. It feels a little bit cheap in the movie.
It feels very cheap. I mean, one of the big subplots in the novel is the whole idea of, well, I guess I should rewind. Harry gets into some trouble at Privet Drive because he's being bullied by Dudley Dursley, the bully son of the family that he's staying with. I guess is his cousin, really. And they both get attacked by Dementors in the alley, and Harry uses his Patronus charm, the giant kind of like smoke horse or whatever, to drive them away. And he immediately
smoke horse.
Yes. he gets reprimanded immediately, a letter from Hogwarts saying that you're expelled. And he's like, what? I said, because you use magic outside of school. And he's like, but I did it in self-defense. So he ends up going to the Ministry of Magic to a hearing where he's basically put on this little mini trial. This is all the very beginning of the book. Dumbledore shows up, and it's a beautiful back and forth between the head of the ministry, Cornelius Fudge, and Dumbledore. But Dumbledore is surprisingly distant. That's the other thing about this book, is it does a great job of stripping Harry Potter of all of the relationships that are key to him, all of the things that he takes refuge in terms of the crappy life that he's living. He gets Quidditch taken away from him. He gets expelled, banned from playing Quidditch in perpetuity, along with the Weasley brothers, partially because after this trial, Dolores Umbridge comes to join the school as the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, and she's a spy for the ministry. She tells the students, we're going to learn completely about theory. We're not going to actually be practicing any magic in the class. And they're like, well, how are we supposed to defend against Voldemort if we can't practice magic? And her answer is, well, Voldemort isn't real, so you don't need to use any magic. As you mentioned, there are these great arguments and counter arguments of people who are intractable in their positions, just kind of butting heads against each other until something approximating the truth comes out. She gets more and more power in the school, to the point where eventually Dumbledore is ousted and she's put in as the head honcho. And there's these kind of mini rebellions within the school, and then they're like the Slytherins. They take up sides with Umbridge because they can be her inquisitors, like the little informants / torturers. And one of the most ghastly scenes in the book, and this is one of the biggest crimes in the translation, the bit where Harry sneaks into Umbridge's office because he needs to communicate with Sirius, because he's had a vision that Sirius is being tortured by Voldemort. He needs to communicate with him through the the fireplace, but all the fireplaces are being guarded by the ministry except for the one in Umbridge's office. They get caught anyway. And in the scene in the book, the Inquisitors come in along with Umbridge, and they round up Harry and like 5 of his friends, and they are torturing them in this office. I mean, they're in severe pain and misery, and there's a real sense of desperation, as opposed to the movie where Harry gets yanked out of the fire. There's a terrible edit where one of the Slytherins come in and say, I found one of Harry's friends sneaking around outside. And then you cut to an opposite view of the room, and everybody else is just in there. Like all the members of this gang. Like, when did this happen? Did they all apparate? I don't think so.
They can't. You only learn that in year 6.
There you go. You can't do that in the boundaries of Hogwarts, right? Or can you?
Right.
And that's what we're going to find out in year 6.
No, in year 6, you find out that they temporarily lift sort of like the geolocation, the geofence for apparition. This is one of my things with Harry Potter. Like, you know, having come from this as kind of like my fantasy awakening, um, you just notice some of the cracks, you know, like apparition is like a great example. It's kind of like, oh, okay, there's really no rules here. And it's easy enough for me to accept that when I'm reading the book, because it's very much, okay, this is just a world in which magic is allowed to exist pretty much unfettered. There's no, it's not a limited resource. You can pretty much use it whenever you want for whatever you want, right? And in the movie, a lot of those cracks start to show because you have to bring all that on screen and things just become painfully obvious. And it's like, ugh. But in the books, there's sort of this like youthful magic to it all, where it's like, you can kind of believe that that Rowling is like, here is the magic of youth kind of come to life. And that's sort of the feeling I get. And in this book, it's kind of like, oh, there's a dark side to it. Like it's finally starting to creep in. And again, you get that sense of build. You get that sense of like, things are not as they seem. 1 through 4 had tons of magic. There was a grisly death, obviously, at the end of 4, but like, we're at this point now where the fantasy, the sort of veil, to use a great foreshadowing term, is kind of starting to lift. And the students are realizing that like, this isn't all butterflies and rainbows anymore. And I think to me, that's what makes sort of like the kind of wishy-washy magic system okay, especially having read many well-defined magic systems with rules and things that govern them, which again is not necessary, but it's like, I kind of scoff at those types of things. And I'm sure I've talked about this in all of our previous episodes, right? But it's, if your magic is going to be ungovernable, there has to be a good reason for it. And I think that this series kind of makes the case for that type of writing and that type of magic, and that like, we don't need a specific structure under which this magic operates, because we're in a society that has existed for thousands of years, just kind of doing it. And that's what I enjoy about it. Like I said, you read the book and it's like, oh shit, this whole beautiful thing they've constructed has a shadow, and the shadow's name is Dolores Umbridge and the Ministry of Magic and Voldemort and all these terrible things. It feels very much like a climax within the larger series, right? It's like, okay, he is back. It is the Wizarding World reckoning with his possible return. And then books 6 and 7 kind of feel like a bit of a denouement, like it's kind of an ending for everything. And that's something I didn't get before when I first read Order of the Phoenix. I just kind of, I couldn't relate when I first read it because I was probably just early middle school and I couldn't identify with the whole angsty teen aesthetic, because I grew up very privileged and I didn't really have much to be anxious about, to be quite frank. But now I look back and I'm like, yeah, this is how frustrating it is when you can't get your point of view across and you can't make people understand you. So there's just a lot of love to it. Like there's a lot of things to love about this book. There's a lot of questions of identity and morality, and it doesn't try to answer too many of these things, whereas some of the earlier books in the series are pretty cut and dry with their morals, and it shows a certain evolution, I think.
Yeah, it does. And I think, talking about the magic, what I do like, and I think it really comes across in this book, maybe more, I think what I'm about to discuss has been there since book 1, but it's really underscored here, which is how difficult it is. They may have unlimited sort of magical resources, but they have to learn how to use it. They make a big point of like Neville has a big hard time working on his spells because he's either the gestures wrong or the intonation wrong. You have to, it's almost like a math problem. You have to have the
wild.
Right, yeah, you have to have the flick of the wrist and the correct intonation and say the right words. Harry actually starts a secret society called Dumbledore's Army in order to because he believes, as well as to his close friends, that Voldemort is coming, so they can't just learn theory and have that be it, but they're being watched, so they discover a room that only appears when you need it to appear. And that sounds really corny, and it comes off as incredibly corny in the movie, but it works in the context of the novel. Because I think they don't the Weasley brothers tell Harry and his friends about this room, or someone had heard about it and they go discover it.
Um,
Whereas in the movie, Neville Longbottom is just walking down the hall, looking kind of like
right.
depressed, and is like, "Oh, look, here's a magical room."
Yeah, Dobby tells Harry in the
That's
book.
what it was. Yeah,
Yeah, which I fucking love Dobby. I just think he's fantastic.
I
But
miss
this
him
is,
in the movie.
yeah, right.
And Creature the house, like there is so much that is
Right.
we see Creature the house elf, but you're like, okay, what's his deal?
Yeah.
W-
I wonder why they had to shoehorn it into the movie. Maybe there will be a reason for that down the line. And that's a big problem. That's something we need to talk about, because it's like you are making these movies in close contact with the author who knows what's going to happen. So some of that cheapness comes from they have to shoehorn or pigeonhole things into the movie because they were told to, and that later on will become important. And that's why some of these scenes, they feel superfluous. And it's like, yeah, within the context of the larger narrative at hand, it's probably going to be important. But to somebody in a vacuum or somebody who hasn't read the books like you, it's like, okay, well, how do we make this work, and how do we make it seamless within the story? Turns out you don't do it that way, because it doesn't work, and it's rather disappointing to see.
Well, when I was reading the novel, because I hadn't seen the film since it was in theaters 15 years ago, almost exactly 15 years ago. There's a great subplot involving Quidditch. I was starting to talk about this, but so Harry gets kicked off the Quidditch team. Ron and a couple other people step in to fill the vacancies left there, and Ron is terrible, but he's still being encouraged by his friends to take this opportunity. And there's a whole bit where the Slytherin kids are they make up a song called Weasley is our king,
Yep.
basically saying he makes it so easy for the other teams to win that he is the king of the Slytherins, essentially. And there's a great turn where Ron wins a match and kind of gets some confidence. And I was reading this thinking, I know I blocked a lot out about these movies, but I don't remember this, but I cannot wait to see this whole thing play out on the screen. And at the end of watching Order of the Phoenix by David Yates, I was like, I'm still waiting to see this play out on the screen.
I would say you need to wait about a year, um, which
They
is
work
which is
this into the next movie?
which is funny, because they're basically like, "Yep, let's throw it into this one instead." Um, and that is literally what happens. There's no other way to say it.
Spoilers. Well, but here's the thing, like I understand we're talking about something that's 15 and 20 years ago. We didn't have the Marvel Cinematic Universe of being able to say, okay, here's 25 movies. We're going to make them weave pretty much seamlessly into this grand narrative. But there's a part of me that wishes they would remake Harry Potter with that in mind, because I'm convinced that there's a way to make a lot of this stuff work without it being a greatest hits highlight reel.
Yep. Um, this is going to be a very slight tangent, but I will reel it in as much as I can. But there's this author that I adore. His name is Brandon Sanderson, and he has this series called The Cosmere, which is effectively the MCU in a fantasy book universe. Characters will cross over between worlds very minimally to start, but it starts to kind of roll up, and it is done exceptionally. And they are just beautiful books. I have leather-bound ones on the shelf to my right now. But Brandon Sanderson recently had the most successful Kickstarter of all time for 4 books he wrote in secret during COVID quarantine periods. On literally the best funded Kickstarter ever, not in books, not just in any category, which is pretty insane. And he said that Hollywood then came calling in a big way, as they do, right? And he had sold the rights before and they lapsed and nothing really came of it. But now he's like, we can do it how we want to do it. And the flagship series of this larger Cosmere universe is called the Stormlight Archive. And he's kind of said, like, I want it to be a Game of Thrones style epic series. And when you mentioned kind of like seeing Harry Potter reimagined, that's what I see now. I see the rich lore of all these fantasy books. And I'm talking, take Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, Stormlight Archive, any of them, any of the major series or even the lesser known ones. And I think there is so much story potential here. And the way that movies and TV shows are made has changed so much that you can do a really phenomenal job of whipping things from the page and creating these like devastatingly emotional character arcs on the screen. I'm starting to question the capability of movies specifically to do this type of thing. Because as you say, 800 pages into 2.5 hours doesn't work. You have to commit the time that the story requires. And I don't care if it's make multiple movies, but my point about Sanderson is like, he knows what format his story will best work as. And I get it, right? Like movies are very marketable. It's an event to go see it, then it's an event to get the Blu-ray, and then it's all the merch and all that. But if we were to see a reimagining of Harry Potter in this day and age, I would want it to be like a 7-season TV series, one for each year. And I want to grow up with these kids, and I want the whole season to encompass what life is like at what life is like at Hogwarts. Like, build the world out, because the movies rely so much on people's past knowledge, and I think they do an okay job, especially early on, of bringing people in who haven't read them. But we have all that, and now's a chance to kind of bring something new into the mix and allow the world time to breathe. And that's where you explore some of the ideas that we've been talking about, because the book has them, but the movie doesn't. Try something new. I guess that's my request in as many words.
Well, no, I think there is something to that. And what I like about that idea is, because streaming is its own beast, there's not like traditional TV would have, like, okay, we're gonna have 24 episodes of a season with breaks and all this other stuff, go from fall to summer. With streaming, you've got some shows are 6 episodes, some are 13. I think the upcoming Daredevil one is going to be 18 or something like that. So you could have 7 seasons, all variable lengths. You don't need 7 hours to tell the Sorcerer's Stone.
Right.
You might need that for Order of the Phoenix, but if you had Sorcerer's Stone is like a 4-episode thing, or as the books get longer, the episodes get longer. I think there really is something to explore there, because I remember when I would see these movies in the theater, and they were hugely popular at the time, and I would tell people how much I hate these movies because they're just long and they don't make any sense. I don't care about the characters, and there's all these like weird special effects flying around. They're like, have you read the books? And I was like, no, nothing about these movies inspires me to go read the source material. Like, you have to read the books. And so I thought, well, that's not necessarily the sign of a good, of good art, if you have to read something in order to appreciate the movie. But now I understand what they're talking about. But my confusion lies kind of retroactively in, I don't see how you can, unless it strictly is that thing of like, I don't really have an imagination, so to speak. So it's wonderful when someone else puts that on the screen so I can finally visualize what I had trouble seeing in my head, and just being grateful for that. And I know that sounds like a put down, and it kind of is, but whatever. Not putting you down, Cole. But my point is, if I were a fan of the books and I watched the movies, I don't know how I would be satisfied with watching the movies outside of a purely aesthetic, concern, because they leave so much out that it's a hollow, it's a jack-o'-lantern. It's a pumpkin that you've removed all the stuffing, and there's just like this pretty thing on the outside.
So yeah, I mean, that is a fantastic point, and I think that is the root of a lot of my issues with rereading them now. I also try to balance my beliefs with what the creator is doing. There's context is important here, and this is a really interesting point, because when I was reading these, they were my entire identity, right? Like, I was think about how you were with Star Wars. Like, this is the millennial Star Wars, effectively. Well, we've seen what actual millennial Star Wars is, and it's not great. But it's like, growing up in this subculture made seeing the movies glorious, because it was as if we were being listened to. And when you're that young, that's a new sensation, right? Like, people will listen, but the adults are talking, that sort of thing. And reading these books, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be able to watch, right? It's like, I just want to see it. I wasn't cognitively aware enough to be like, oh, is this a great adaptation? I was just thinking, this is more Harry Potter content. And in the time when that's all the cultural zeitgeist is concerned with, seeing your favorite characters brought to the screen is absolutely amazing. And in this way, kind of Harry Potter taught me an interesting lesson over time, which is that tastes change and preferences change, and that is a good thing, and that is growth, right? Because reading these now, I don't even list them among my favorite books. I was talking with my dad recently, and he was like, "What's your favorite book ever?" And I told him, and he was like, I'm very surprised you didn't say Harry Potter. I think it should be Harry Potter." And I was like, "Well, you clearly don't know what I like and what I'm interested in that much, because that wouldn't even probably break the top 50 anymore. Like I've read so many amazing books that I like better, but none of them would have been in my orbit if it weren't for this." So it's like I think about growing up with it, and I think Ian's completely wrong. It's like this was amazing to see on screen. But now I think about it as 30-year-old me, and I'm like, oh, he's definitely right. Watching these now is disappointing compared to reading the book. So it's just like the emotions of the time and just the overarching kind of societal appreciation for a thing can really change it. Can really change the perception of an adaptation. And then I think that evolves over time too. And that's why we're having this conversation now. It's very much like, oh, the adaptation quality has changed because I have changed. And it's kind of a remarkable thing to realize that media changes you and vice versa. Like it feels kind of weirdly powerful in a way, because I was part of this big thing. And now I don't like it quite as much. And that's powerful too.
Well, I was struck by what you're saying just now, by how that circles directly back to Harry Potter, because this is something that is in the movie, but it's just, again, like everything else in this film, glossed over with this kind of superficial brush. It's given more room to breathe in the book. Was it Seamus? I think in the film, I know he and Harry got into an argument because Seamus didn't believe that Voldemort was back.
Me
and
man
Harry
doesn't
did.
believe you.
Right. Yeah. But that was the whole thing, is later in the film, he said, well, maybe there is something to this after all. I think Ron said, "Oh, is that because your mom read it in the Daily Prophet? So now everything now everything makes sense because the newspaper told you what to think." But that's exactly what we're kind of talking about here with taste changing and media changing, but also our perceptions of the media changing, and the way that the media alters our perceptions changing as well. So it's all of a piece. Man, there's so much in here that I wish, not that I wish I could see it on screen, because reading the book, I was watching the movie of my own head, but there's some stuff that was just, I think, unforgivable. The centaurs. All right.
Yep.
The whole point, and I'm not in Rowling's head. I wasn't in her head when she wrote the book. But what I got from it was a pseudo, I'll call it a Native American analogy, but it could be any kind of like colonialized people analogy. Right. They're the centaurs that live in the woods surrounding Hogwarts, and one of their own ends up becoming a teacher at Hogwarts, and he gets banned from their entire society, like straight up beaten the hell up and cast out. Now they've got some really rich conversations that they have amongst each other and with some of the people, some of the characters in the book. And you get a sense that they're a noble people, and they don't take shit from anybody, and they hate outsiders, and they really resent the way that they feel the outside world, not necessarily the greater outside world, but certainly the wizarding world, looks upon them and their people. And Dolores Umbridge comes in as the representation of the sort of the colonizing elite, right, and says, how dare you people try and tell me I can't go into the woods? You're just a bunch of like brainless savages. It's a chilling point in the book, because we've spent time with these characters in a way that she hasn't. And when they finally stand up for themselves against her and end up dragging her off into the woods, probably to do horrible things to her, we're like, yes, this is just because that prejudice was unfounded, and she's finding out just what happens when you don't get to know people. The film makes Dolores Umbridge's point for her, because the centaurs don't have any dialogue. They are rampaging savages who just want to protect their territory, and they drag, a woman who didn't really do much to them except like call them names, but it's unclear that they would even be capable of understanding what she said.
Yeah.
to
Tell
them.
me you missed the point without telling me you missed the point, right? It's this is especially disappointing because in the first movie, Ferenz makes an appearance.
Yes.
And he is noble and he saves Harry.
Was that in the
And
movie or the book?
it was in the movie. Well, it was in both, but
I don't remember that.
he is in the movie. Harry is about to get attacked by a shadowy figure drinking from a unicorn's corpse, and Ferenz comes and saves him. It's very early CGI, and it's very dark, so it's easy to forget, but it happens. And Ferenz is very clear, like, it is dangerous here for you. I am going to save you, and then he kind of helps him away. But this whole subplot is, I think, as you said, kind of crucial to the structure of the book. In particular, because of Dolores Umbridge as a villain, because she comes across as this person masquerading as nice, but she is really kind of like a simulacrum of this oppressive systemic authority. And I think that makes her the most intriguing villain of the series, as I said earlier, because she is not just, I want to kill everybody who is not like me, which is bad. Don't get me wrong, right? But it's like, that's the easy villain to write, I think. I feel like I could write that sort of villain. It's just, he just wants everybody dead. He wants to live forever. Like, it's kind of cookie cutter at this point. Whereas Umbridge seems as if she's doing everything by the book. And then through her, you slowly start to realize that, oh, the people who wrote the book are just like her and they are bad. And the Centaur subplot is part of it, but also, the way she treats the Hogwarts staff. And I think that for me, one of the shining glories of the movie is the portrayal and adaptation of Dolores Umbridge and the performance. I don't know the actress's name. You got to help me out here. But I think note for note and just sort of like general vibe wise, it is one of the most delightfully vicious and accurate interpretations of a villain from the page to the screen, even despite all of the things that were cut from the book to the movie. I just think it's a remarkable performance. I also love the scene between her and McGonagall, where McGonagall's standing up to her and they kind of step up on the stairs next to each other. But at the end of the day, McGonagall realizes like she has the power of the Ministry behind her and I need to back down. And, even that small scene shows what people do in the face of terrible oppressive power, which is often nothing because they feel powerless. And that's what Dolores Umbridge represents. She represents, feeling like you have the power of this vicious, huge army behind you, and using it to your full advantage. I just love her in this movie. I think she's absolutely fantastic. And I think it's one of the better Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher portrayals of the entire series.
I agree. And I think what's interesting about her is you kind of get the feeling that she portrays herself as very nice. And you almost think inside her head, she's like, I'm going to resort to torturing students. I don't really want to, but it's for the greater good of the ministry. But then you peel back the onion a little bit more and she's like, that is the narrative that she would present if she got caught. She does want to. The one addition I think that actually kind of worked, although it doesn't really make any sense if you think about it. There's a scene when the students are taking their owls, the original wizarding
ordinary
levels,
wizarding
ordinary
levels.
Yes, they're basically their first set of grades to find out, they're like their wizarding SATs or PSATs, whatever.
Yep. Trying to get into wizard college.
Right. They are well, Harry gets detention and he has to write, I will not tell lies or something like that. And he uses a black quill, but there's no ink. That's because when he writes it on the parchment, it is actually being etched into his hand in blood. There's a scene later in the film where all of the members of Dumbledore's army, after they're caught, if I'm remembering correctly, they're all in that great hall. They're all writing with the black quills, and Umbridge is sitting sort of in a throne, like overseeing them and sipping tea. Again, that's not in the book. It doesn't make any sense in the context of the movie because even though she's very brazen, I don't think she would have been that brazen because someone in that class would have talked. They remove completely the whole idea of Harry's shame at having been the victim of this torture and keeping it from his friends, really wanting to tell somebody, but for chapters and chapters he keeps it in. Whereas in the movie, like 2 hours after detention, they're in the Great Hall, and Hermione is like, "What happened to your hand?" And like, Dolores Umbridge tortured me. I'm like, oh, I literally slapped my hand against my head. My wife, we watched this together, and she was just like looking at me the entire 2 hours, like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "No, this is terrible."
On the flip, I completely agree with everything you just said. Nothing to add, but I do want to say on the flip side, the scene in the movie where Fred and George make their grand escape is one of my single favorite scenes of any of the 8 Harry Potter films. Goosebumps every time. The soundtrack is immaculate. The CGI holds up. It just, it's one of these moments where like I think back to movies 1 and 2 where everything was kind of charming and delightful, even with the backdrop of this terrible, like, plot. But in these movies, like, shit's getting serious, and and serious is getting shit, consequently. But it's very much like there is that dark undertone. You feel sort of like a dark ooze kind of bubbling beneath everything, and that moment is just kind of pure unfettered joy until it's not, obviously. But I love it, and I think it's one of the crowning achievements of this movie, just because it captures the Fred and George aesthetic so well. And it's sort of that rebellious attitude that everybody needs in a time like that.
I couldn't. I agree with you. It's very well done, but I couldn't get into it at all because, again, the context. If you're just watching this as a movie, they say the line that's from the book. They're like, George and Fred, I think our time as Hogwarts students has come to an end.
Yep.
It's time for us to leave. Watching the movie, you're like, what the fuck are you talking about? You haven't graduated yet. What are you going to do?
They show nothing of them getting banned from Quidditch. Fred and George are barely entities in it at all.
Right.
Yeah, you're totally right.
But the whole thing is Harry took his winnings from was it the big cup or whatever from the last
Triwizard
movie
tournament.
Right, the Triwizard tournament. He took the winnings and secretly gave it to Fred and George so they could start their magic shop that they've always wanted to start.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get hints of it, like them kind of giving out little tricks and things and testing stuff on students in the movie throughout the film, but it's never really explained what they're doing, why it's important, the danger that they could get in if they're discovered by the school or their parents, because their parents don't know. Nobody knows that Harry gave them this money except for the 3 of them. So when they leave school, they're like, yeah, we've got a place set up in Diagon Alley. We've got supplies coming in. This is what we want to do with our lives. That's what makes that scene glorious. But without that context, it's just like, all right, so now what are they going to do?
Well, I'm so excited to report that in movie 6, they continue the Fred and George arc with virtually no explanation.
This might be the end of the series, Cole. I don't know if I can go on.
But it's the same thing, right? It's like in movie 6, and I know we'll talk about it, but it's like it is a joyful, wonderful scene that the Phelps twins play so well, and it offers no context or explanation from the previous movies. But gotta read the books.
I guess so. I want to wrap up. I mean, there's a lot we could cover, but much like the film, I figure we'll just gloss over it and let other people discover the magic.
Excellent.
But I do, the climax inside the Ministry of Magic is thrilling to read in the book. And it's one of those examples, I think, of the kind of the charming magic from the earlier stories being twisted into something that is just plain weird and kind of terrifying. At one point, there is a pack of Death Eaters led by Lucius Malfoy coming after Harry and his friends, what was the name of the giant dragon things that they rode on to get there?
Thestrals.
Thestrals, yes. The whole idea of the Thestral is they're invisible creatures that the only people who can see them are ones who have experienced death or like known someone who's died. And so Harry and Luna Lovegood and Neville, they can all see them. Ron and Hermione, a couple other people can't. So there's a great passage in the book where they're trying to convince their friends to go on this rescue mission by riding these Thestrals. And they're like, ride what? And there's they're like, Harry is enjoying this flying through the air and everything, but he looks over and sees that Ron and Hermione are freaked out because they're like riding on something they can't see. In the movie, the audience just sees all of them riding on dragons.
And it's the most like pandery 3D made scene, because I remember seeing this movie in 3D and the Thestrals were like flying out at me, and I'm like, they just wasted 30 seconds on this.
But getting to the ministry, there's a bit where one of the Death Eaters, they're going through a room and there's potions and shit, and something breaks open, and he gets the head of a baby on the body of a giant, Death Eater guy. And so you have this thrashing, insensible infant still trying to basically have a tantrum, a deadly tantrum. And so I'm reading this thinking, this is really bizarre, but it's also chilling because the characters don't know that it's ridiculous. I don't know they don't know they're going to be safe. I do. So putting yourself in that moment, this is where the magic, they've said, oh, this person gets these pustules on their face. Ha ha ha. They'll go to the nurse's office and it's fine. No, this is a baby, a killer baby that's attacking people and doing some real damage to folks. Ron goes insane because he's often some room where there's the galaxy and the universe, and the Death Eaters are flying after them. We don't see any of that. Everybody's just kind of fine.
Well, the ministry is so fascinating in the book, the Department of Mysteries in particular, because it gives the impression, kind of ham-fistedly, but a little subtle. There's a little subtlety to it, that the Department of Mysteries is dedicated to studying primeval forces that drive existence. That's the impression I get. You have a death room, you have a brains room, you have a time room, and it's okay, there's some shit going down. And then in the movie, it's well, we're just by the veil because it has to be there. There is no other way to do this, right? And the other room we didn't mention is the one with the brains that just kind of pop out and screw with people's psyches. These ideas are what I want from a book with magic. How does magic impact the forces that govern our daily life, and vice versa? What impact does it have? What do you have to watch out for? What are the magical threats to your existence beyond a person who wants to kill you? And this book kind of comes through in that regard. It's you don't know the specifics of these rooms because you are not allowed to. You are a student invading the ministry. So we're kind of, they are our eyes and ears, and we're understanding these things as they are. And that's what's fascinating about the scene is this room spins and they're burning X's indoors to mark the ones that they've been through. And they go through and, they're just hoping for the best. They're kids. Which kind of makes...
There's the one door, the one that they cannot open. And you're I don't want to know what's behind there.
Yeah, the fandom speculates that is the love room, and I don't mean that in some weird sexual way, but this all kind of brings us to a good point, which is I have had a discussion with many people who believe that Dumbledore is pretty much an outright villain in the entire series, and I think it's best to save most of the discussion for the next book for very particular reasons, but this one kind of starts that thread. It starts to pull on it. It starts to tug it and make you think, is everything Dumbledore doing is above board? Because he kind of abandons Harry. And yes, he comes through to rescue him when it matters. But this whole book is kind of this kid is trying to understand what is happening to him. He is essentially the Jesus Christ of the wizarding world, and he's trying to help. And you're just kind of leaving him to be fed on by this evil force. And there's a lot more to consider with Dumbledore specifically in the next two books. But I think that this kind of starts that ball rolling and asks, is everything he's doing okay? Is he making the right decisions? Which is crucial because then you start to ask, is Dumbledore as powerful as we think he is? Or is he just a human with immense power who is possibly using it wrong? And this is also important within the context of Sirius's death because Harry loses arguably his second to last father figure. I mean, he has Lupin and Mr. Weasley left, but Sirius kind of hit different for him a little bit. It was you were my dad's best friend, and you're somebody I can confide in. And, that death marks, I think, a big turning point for him. It's nobody is safe, right? Cedric, you could view as a fluke. You could view as we touched it together. It was kind of my fault, but Sirius shows that anybody can die.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that whole thing up about him being Harry's father's best friend in school. The novel goes way more in depth into showing we get to see through the pensieve a lot of it almost becomes the prequel story
Right.
for a while. And I think it's great because you get to see that, I can't remember, what is Harry's father's name?
James.
James. Okay. I want to say George, but that's a different character. But we get to see that he was just a student, and he was kind of vain. He liked to kind of fuck with people. And, Lily, I remember his mom's name, had a positive influence on the man he would become. But what Harry wrestles with is he's constantly been told, oh, you're just like your father. And he always thought that was a positive thing. But when Snape says it to him, and some other people say that, they're like, wait, why are you saying that like it's a bad thing? What do you know about my past and my father
Right.
that I don't know? And that's just something else that piles onto this misery that is part of the trials that he's going through. And in the movie, it's, a 2-minute scene of, some people by a lake, and there's a wand, and, one guy gets lifted up in the air. It's
They're shouting snivelus.
right. I mean, again, that happens in the book, but there's 20
Yep.
pages of context that is just so much cooler than what they see on the screen.
Yeah, it's the book makes it so much more remarkable to read, because I think that of all the books, this one reminds me the most that this is a pretty epic coming of age story. And it does it with so much more than just being a hero. It engages with the idea that you have a vision of your parents that may not be entirely accurate. You have a vision of the world that can be torn down once you actually learn a little bit about it. There's all these ideas that you learn growing up that Harry is kind of wrestling with. And the stress of being the one guy who can stop all of the bad stuff that's happening kind of puts him through like a hyperloop. It's like, you got to go fast. You got to, and even reading these year by year, it feels like everything is just kind of blowing by. But it does so at this kind of breakneck pace. And then you feel like these really slow moments for a second where it's just like Harry reckoning with his father's past, which could have been removed and the books probably would have been fine for it. But it adds so much context to his character and to the people around him. They're all trying to make a world in which he is comfortable and feels safe. But the more he learns, the more he realizes that is impossible for them. And the sooner he can let go of it, the better he can help.
Well, I don't think you can take that stuff out of the book and have it be the same, because what it does is it adds dimension to, you've got Harry Potter, this kind of Christ figure. He's the boy who lived, but part of the contrast, I don't know if they get into this more in the other books. I'm excited to find out, but to find out why there are people that don't like Harry Potter. We've got Snape for obvious reasons. He has a grudge against James Potter. But, if you look at, Weasley, not Weasley, my gosh, Malfoy, the Malfoy family. Yeah, they're just they're Slytherins. They're inherently evil. But you get the feeling that they don't like Harry Potter, and there might be other deeper reasons for that beyond the fact that, oh, we're the villains and we hate the hero.
Right.
This not quite a squeaky clean, family and past that they've got going on. So I'm excited to talk about book 6 next year. I should mention this is going to be going up a little bit before Harry Potter's birthday, but we always do this right around July 31st because that's Harry's birthday officially.
And Neville's.
No, I forgot they were born the same. Oh, damn it. Another tangent. They left out all of the St. Mungo's hospital business with
that's a big
Neville's
miss.
family. And oh God, why? Anyway, Cole Rush of the Quill to Live and Tor.com and the forthcoming game show Superstar. I'm going to let you finish the rest of this plug, sir, because there's some exciting stuff coming up. Tell us about where we're going to see you next.
I am so excited to say that I am a contestant on a reboot of the game show Password. My episode will feature Jimmy Fallon, as all the episodes do, and you will also see me playing with my celebrity partner, Heidi Klum. Password is a very near and dear game to my heart. I've played with my family for years. I'm super excited for people to see it. It airs August 10th on NBC. You can check your local listings. I believe it'll be, I want to say 8 Central, but don't take my word for it. Check your listings. And it'll be on Peacock the next day. So you can watch me compete in a game of words, which is what I peddle in from day to day. So I feel good about it.
And we'll also get to find out, because you haven't even told me if you won or not. This is all very hush hush under wraps contract stuff, I imagine. So
Yep.
I'm
I'm
excited
very
to find out
excited
the
to say,
outcome.
watch it and find out.
Excellent, man. That's great. And I would love to see you be on more game shows, because you're in the trailer for the damn TV series. I'll link that below. That's really cool.
Yeah,
to
that
see
was
you.
a very pleasant surprise to see myself pop up. In the I expected to see like a sliver of my head or something, but really cool to see myself pop up in the trailer.
The password is adaptation. All right. Well, thank you very much, Cole. We'll be back next month with another Page to Screen, if we can make it work out, for Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, which was turned into a film by Paul Verhoeven back in 1997. So that'll be the 25th
Excellent.
anniversary of that movie.
And I will derail that conversation to talk about Sandman.
Have fun. That's part of. I'm not watching. Well, that technically doesn't fall under superhero
I don't think it counts.
content.
I think it is. It supersedes your ban.
I don't know. I love.
I'll watch it
Sandman.
and let you know if it fits.
Well, that's the thing, is I love Sandman. I watched the trailers. I don't want to see the Netflix series. It doesn't do anything for me. But that I'm willing to be swayed, much like
I just finished
like
a months long binge. I read. I still have like Overture and some of the ancillary material, but I finished every core Sandman graphic novel. So I'm excited to see what they do. Knowing that Gaiman is involved heavily makes me feel good, but I am excited to hopefully disagree with you about it. We will see.
Well, we shall. Big Neil Gaiman fan. One of these days I'm gonna have to transcribe the interview I did with him 20 years ago from tape,
Wow.
from micro cassette tape,
Wow.
onto some kind of digital medium. So that'd be fun to re-listen to. But until we talk again, Cole, congratulations on whatever happened with Password. Thank you very much for talking about Harry Potter. This is year 5. This is quite a milestone. I'm excited to talk about it again next year and all the ensuing conversations we'll have. So till next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thanks. Take care. Oh, by the way, follow Cole's stuff, everybody. It's all links down in the description. If you like this show, please like and subscribe to the channel, and we will catch you at some point in the very near future.
Fare thee well, and see you then.
Yay.